Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this talk and thank you for joining Remote Fest. The topic of this presentation is why everyone should know some basic JavaScript. With me is Mashhood Rastgar. So let's start with my introduction. I am Sami Harun, working as a senior software engineer at Remotebase. So, Mashhood bhai, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sami. And my name, as mentioned, is Mashud. I lead the engineering team at sastaticket.pk.
Mhm.
For those who don't know, Sastaticket is a travel-based startup. We're essentially helping sell flights, hotels, bus tickets online for our Pakistani citizens. Um, Besides my formal work, I am usually working as a Google developer expert for web and Angular, which basically means going around doing talks like these, sessions like these, helping give perspective to people, share my knowledge, mentor people as well. On the side, I'm also sometimes doing a podcast called Karachi Wala Developer.
Awesome.
If you guys have some interest, do check that out. Um, One important point I just wanted to share, just in the context. So for me, JavaScript has been a very long journey. I
Mhm.
got introduced to JavaScript when I was almost 10 years old, and this is now coming up to 20 years playing with JavaScript.
Amazing.
So
It's like JavaScript experience is more than your half of the age.
yeah, exactly. So and my the beauty is that right from the start I've seen how JavaScript was only used for specific things,
Hmm.
like 20 years ago, maybe validation or something very specific. But nowadays, how it's evolved over time to run full blown applications, and what it is today, it's completely different. So it's
Yep.
really exciting to be here and sharing about all of the stuff that I've experienced over these years.
Thank you, Mashud. Thank you for a very good introduction. So, just moving towards the questions for this fireside chat is like you might have seen that JavaScript is gaining popularity, but like every day. So, what have you seen that what has allowed JavaScript to explode in popularity over the last few years?
Yeah. So let's try to first understand why is JavaScript popular. And uski, the main reason for that is basically it is the only language, scripting language that you can run in a web browser, right? You can't run Java natively. You have to install applets and stuff. You can't run any language natively in a browser, but JavaScript is supportive natively in a browser. So if you want to build a web application, which all of us want to build web applications, you will need to know some JavaScript. So that is the underlying reason why it's so popular. Now, over the last few years, and I'm going to specifically talk about the last 5 to 8 years, the popularity of JavaScript has exploded. There were two main reasons for this. One was in 2008 when Node.js came out, and you could
Yes.
start building JavaScript backend applications and front-end applications, and the rise of mean stack and MERN stack. So the cool part about that was that now I could just learn a single language and I can do everything. So that essentially allowed this. I mean, MERN stack and mean stack are probably the most popular programming stacks out there right now, especially in
Yes.
Pakistan. And that was one of the big reasons that JavaScript took off. The second big reason is that in the JavaScript community, there has been an insane amount of open source work. And all of that work is not just focused on the web, but it's focused on everything around you. So you can now not only build web or backends, but you can build desktop applications, you can build mobile apps, you can build, like, think of something and you can build that with JavaScript, right? So naturally, if you can build anything with JavaScript, then it's gonna start eating into every single domain slowly, and it's gonna come up with it's gonna get popular basically. So from my,
Yes.
my perspective, I think these are the few things why JavaScript has really increased in popularity over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely, Mashud. But you might have seen that there is a new kid in the town which name is TypeScript. Basically,
Yeah.
it runs on top of JavaScript. So, why do you think it is so useful to use TypeScript?
Yeah, so TypeScript is a very interesting thing, right? Because JavaScript had um, some problems with it, and when I say problems, they're not really problems. You can write a pure JavaScript application and you'll be just fine. But there are always things that you can improve in a language. And one of the things when you're working at scale, when you're working with a big code base, we're talking about 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 lines of code, having dynamic typing and having no typing configured, static typing configured, becomes very hard to manage in the code base. So
Absolutely.
TypeScript kind of came in to focus on that one problem. And then very soon we realized typing was just one of the things it solved. Obviously, with good typing, you get good documentation. So that's another benefit you get right out of the box. And then the third benefit, which most people don't even realize, is that the even though JavaScript has been evolving so fast, but the ecosystem has actually been evolving faster than JavaScript itself. So a lot of the new libraries now, and Angular is probably the biggest one out there using this, opted to use TypeScript simply because it already had things that will come into JavaScript hopefully in a couple of years. And one of the examples is just decorators was part of the language
Yes.
in 2012 when Angular was being rewritten. So that's been a huge thing for TypeScript. Now, going forward, people realizing that since you have the better tooling, you have better documentation, you have static typing with TypeScript, and you're not bound to it. It's more flexible. It's not like Java. So people really like that, and they've been embracing TypeScript in their projects. So if you're a JavaScript developer looking to work in any big company, you will come across TypeScript, and I would recommend learning about it. But that's not definitely something you should start with. Start with just normal JavaScript. It's very quick and easy start off, and then slowly build yourself towards TypeScript.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Plus, one thing I noticed that you can eventually write JS code inside TS files, and it will
Yeah,
eventually work as well. So
yeah,
the more you learn more about TypeScript, you can apply that. But even if you know JS, you can just definitely use JS as much as you want, but uh, keep learning TS and just keep improving your JS code.
agreed,
So,
agreed. Yep.
yep. So now we have seen that JavaScript is getting popular, but what do you think is the future of JavaScript at the moment? Like, will it be becoming irrelevant with the increasing popularity of technologies like WebAssembly, Rust?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great question. So I think as of right now, so JavaScript's popularity is increasing, and it's increasing exponentially. If you look at the graphs, it's one of the top languages in the world right now, together with Python and probably some other ones. Um, why is that? Again, because if you want to do any UI related work, JavaScript is or TypeScript is the main language to go forward with. Now, WebAssembly is an interesting contender, and WebAssembly essentially you can use that with Rust or any other language, basically C++, whatever. It's
Hmm.
compiling to WASM basically, and so you have to understand why WebAssembly is coming in, right? So it's not there to replace JavaScript. It's actually there to take off some load from JavaScript, some things which are best done in a different language. And
Yes.
these things are usually done are high computative things. An example would be like if you wanted to build like a Photoshop on your web browser. Now, for years we've been using Photoshops, different types of photo editors and stuff in our web browsers. But if you try like editing high resolution images, your browser will struggle with that, right? Because
Yes.
there's memory allocation issues, there's thread related issues. Even in with web workers and stuff, you can do a lot of stuff off the main thread, but you're still stuck with doing limited computative and memory powers basically. So WebAssembly
Yes.
is focused on those things, and actually WebAssembly stuff cannot work on the main UI thread anyway, so it's not meant to be used for that. So if you bring these things together, I WebAssembly is a cool tech, and I think it's going to grow in popularity, and we're going to have some pretty awesome things coming out, some awesome games and awesome applications, and we're already seeing them. Photoshop's web experiences is already built in WASM already. But JavaScript is there to stay for now, and unless all of the browsers simultaneously decide to adopt a different standard, it's not going to change, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Sure. So basically, WebAssembly is just providing us an interface to cut down some middle layers and talk to the machine in a more efficient way.
Yeah, yeah, and for specific use cases which are very computative and memory heavy, you can probably write them better in a language like Rust.
Sure. Great. So, just curious about what do you think is the core benefits of Java using JavaScript as a programming language as compared to the other programming languages we have? We have like other languages which are topping charts of popularity as well. But when comes to choice of technology, what do you think JavaScript is providing better than others?
Yeah, so I believe one of my favorite things when I compare it to other programming languages is its async behavior. And I'm not sure how many technical folks are here, but JavaScript, by default, everything is asynchronous in JavaScript. And I really like that because it allows you to write code that is a little bit efficient and non-blocking at all times. Now, this has issues, and I know, especially when if you're not using async await, or if you're using callbacks, it could really mess up your code base. But if you use it properly, I think I really enjoy the way the work flows within JavaScript. So that's one big thing that I really like about JavaScript, that's different. The second thing that I really like about JavaScript, which is very different when compared to other languages, is it's extremely strong open source ecosystem, and the fact that anything that you want to do, you will go and type it on the web, and you'll find a library for it. And the most famous example out there would probably be, there's a library there called leftpad that just adds zeros for you in front of a number, right? So like even that thing, there's a library, and literally there's you shouldn't be using that library technically. It's just a single line function. But the point is that somebody just went there and wrote a library because some people were asking about it. And that's the cool thing about JavaScript's ecosystem, that people are continuously looking for problems to solve and solving them, and people are using them, and the dependencies go way back. Not to say that on its own is a problem, then dependency hell, but I think overall the community is very strong and something that we all enjoy. um, the One of the big things that I think JavaScript has that's very unique is, like I mentioned before, is the fact that as a full stack developer,
Mhm.
you can build anything you want using JavaScript. So you can start from the front end, you can work on the back end, you can use stuff like MongoDB, and that's also very JavaScript native. It's designed to work with the
Mongoose,
merge
yes.
stack. So all of these things kind of come together, and then you can write mobile apps in JavaScript. There is no other language that does it this well, this
Yes.
natively. So that's one of the big things that kind of stick with JavaScript and helps it stand out. And because of this, I think a final point on this one would be the tooling available in the JavaScript ecosystem. And uh, a lot of work has been done. And one of the cool things about it is, since it's all web based, the tooling itself is very comprehensive, but also very easy to use. So one of the languages where I actually use the debugger a lot is JavaScript, simply because all I have to do is open dev chromes and
Yes.
DevTool and Chrome DevTools, and just click
Just
on
point. Yes.
yeah, exactly. Doing that in other languages require you to run a debugger separately, hook the code in, and then you have to set a
Execute
breakpoint
the
in the
code
code.
line by line. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's seamless, it's super cool, and I really enjoy using the tooling part as well in the JavaScript ecosystem.
Also, not just to mention like the PWS, you can directly deploy them as mobile applications.
Yeah, man. PWAs, I think were. I think right as of right now, there's again still more focus on mobile apps, but I think PWAs are still amazing tools to use for those who don't want to invest in a full-blown mobile app. And
Yes.
as mobile web improves and improves every day, uh, we're gonna have some pretty awesome apps coming out just on the web platform in the coming years.
Awesome, awesome. So, Mashid, do you think that JavaScript, using JavaScript in a real world application is sustainable? For example, if you are an engineer or an entrepreneur, who are looking to build great products. So do you think JavaScript can be a good choice for them as well?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what does one think of when they're going ahead to build something in a language, right? What are they thinking about? They're thinking about things like how well, what sort of communities available to support me, what sort of frameworks are available to support me, what sort of scaling problems will I run into, how will I interface with different things like databases, what are the communication protocols. So, and if you look at across the board and over the last several years, how JavaScript has evolved, how its tooling has evolved, um, you will find again, there's so many tools out there. And I think this is the
Yes.
only thing that I actually don't like about JavaScript is the choice fatigue. If I go out there, if I just wanted to say, oh, I want a starter package for Mern, right? I'm going to start with the
Yes.
Mern project. I will find 100 different projects there that all are Mern starter kits, and each
Yes.
one looks a little bit better than the previous one. So that becomes really hard to figure out which ones to go by with. But I think an easier way out, at least for myself, I you follow the thought leaders, you see what they're building, and they will always be suggesting these things, and you can easily find out which are the best ones to actually look at and use at the end of the day. But I would strongly recommend using JavaScript just because I think it is one of the few languages which again does everything. And unless you have a very specific use case where maybe you're building something that is well suited for Go because you want to have extremely high concurrency in your application, right? Extremely high throughput. Or you're building
Yes.
something that's very specific to Rust or like type safety or
C++.
memory management or something. Exactly. So there will be cases where it's not relevant, but I think for general cloud-based applications, JavaScript kind of owns.
Sure, thank you. So, Mashud, now just talking about scaling applications, how do you think JavaScript is like used at scale by companies like PayPal, Walmart, Twitter, or Uber?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very important question, right? Because and this is a fear that everyone has. A lot of
Yes,
people think that JavaScript will break when you have millions of users using it, and sometimes it's not even a valid concern because you don't know if your application is going to even hit that high, and if it's going to be the same application. So that's always something to think about. But let's assume you are planning for that scale, and what sort of problems will you run into? I think you will run into problems no matter what stack you pick. Even if you pick up Java with Spring, which is a tried and tested stack, right? And it regularly takes on that load, but you will still find that scaling Java to a size like a few million users or millions of requests per second is non-trivial, right? You will run into problems.
yes.
Similarly, JavaScript will have the same problems as well. You will start running into throughput issues, optimization issues, and you will have to drill down and figure those out. Now, you mentioned several companies like PayPal, Walmart. You will also find that they have some really helpful blogs. So, in case you're doing something like that, I would recommend checking those out. And you'll find some tidbits here and there how they have configured their repositories and what sort of stacks and libraries they're using to help them get through some of the scaling challenges. But the final point I want to make over here, and this is important, that at the end of the day, what's important in a language? What important? The thing that's important is that when the language that is being used by developers, and if I pick up a language, let's say Go, for example, and I know it's extremely good with high concurrency, and I'm going to build everything really cool and awesome, but no one in my team knows Go, that is actually a big red flag. I would rather take on JavaScript and build something that will run into some issues and I'll figure those out because I have a very experienced JavaScript team rather than choosing Go, where
Yes.
I will learn something and might most probably will build the wrong thing first. And then I'll figure out, oh, these are the right ways to do it. So that becomes a very important factor when you're thinking about scale
So, Mashud,
and yeah.
we have last minute. I think I want to take one question. Somebody mentioned that why don't we use JavaScript in AI that much?
Ah, that's a very interesting question. So we actually do use JavaScript in AI, and uh, so you have to again focus on what are you trying to do with AI, right? If you're trying to build models, are you trying to do just usage, if you talk about using AI in web browsers, obviously all of that is done by JavaScript. There's some models that are trained and used on. Have a look at Firebase stuff. You'll be
Hmm.
using JavaScript basically to use all of your AI, right? So that's
Yes.
the application of AI. And the second thing that's important is that if you're trying to build models, then you have model specific languages that are actually better tuned for that work. So
Yep.
JavaScript might not be relevant there. But if you're doing things like data manipulation and stuff, again, you'll find Python to be the more appropriate language there just because it has the right tool set. But that doesn't mean JavaScript is not being used. It is being used, but the people who do that kind of work are more familiar with Python. That's why they choose Python and R and those languages and not JavaScript. That's why you see less of it in that ecosystem. But you
Awesome.
can
Thank
definitely
you,
use it.
Mashud. I think we are above our mark. So thank you so much, Mashud bhai, for this insightful session. So
Awesome.
see you. Bye bye. Thank you.
All right. Nice. Thanks for having me. See you guys. Bye bye.